presentation is related to the previous one, last Wednesday night, so I don't remember how many of you weren't here, but in any event, it's sufficiently independent that even if you weren't here previously, you'll be able to follow easily tonight. I'll ask that everybody hold a Tanakh in front of them. You'll need a Tanakh for tonight. Homilies that relate to Purim with regard to the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible. And hopefully, while this is going to be somewhat technical, we'll examine verses, but hopefully the upshot of all this will be to raise some very significant questions about our present texts of Tanakh. And in that sense, as I say, it continues what I did last Wednesday. A seminal essay by a leading Masoretic scholar, Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, was written a few years ago on many of the items that I'm going to be discussing, but I shall be moving beyond his essay and indeed adducing some new evidence that he missed. Let's start with Parshat Zachor. I'm just going to list some of the problematic passages, and then we'll go and investigate each passage separately. Parshat Zachor is going to be celebrated here in America, I believe, the first Shabbat in March. In Parshat Zachor, of course, we read from Sefer Dvarim, the Parsha of Amalek. So if you open up to Deuteronomy 25, or the end of Parshat Ki Teitzei, would you take a look now? And in fact, in each case now, I want to survey what you have in front of you. Some of you brought your own Tanakh, so we might actually find some different readings. We'll see what happens. All right, the end of Parshat Ki Teitzei, Deuteronomy 25. And of course, the key verse I'm interested in is verse 19, the last verse in the Sedra. End of the verse, which begins, V'haya b'aniach Hashem Elokecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha nachala l'rishta timche, and I have in my Tanakh et Zecher Amalek. Does anybody have anything other than et Seirah under the Zion and a Segol under the Chaf? Everybody has the same? This is Dvarim Chaf Hei Yutet. Chaf Hei Yutet. Zecher. With a Tzedeh under the Zion and the Segel. No one here disagrees. Everyone has the same reading in the Tanakh. Okay, fine. I'm holding a Jewish code of law in my hand, with the Mishnah Berurah, with the commentary of the Chafetz Chaim, Yisrael Meir HaKohen, and here's what it says. This is on Parshat Zachor. You're supposed to read all the Parshiyot, B'neginatam u'v'ta'amam. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch, of Rabbi Yosef Karo. You should read them all, B'neginatam u'v'ta'amam. Da'ad yesh omrim, this is the Mishnah Berurah. Da'ad yesh omrim shetzarich likrot Zecher, Zayin with a Tzedeh, Chaf with a Segol. B'tzeira. V'yesh omrim shetzarich likrot Zecher Amalek. Zayin with a Segol and Chaf with a Segol. V'al kein me'anachon she'akorei yikra shnehem. Latzet yidei shnehem. And indeed, certainly in all Ashkenazi synagogues, when they read Parashat Zachor, the Baal Korei will read usually the verse twice. It's unclear from the Mishnah Berurah what you're supposed to do. I'll read his words again. What he says is, V'alkein me'anachon she'akorei yikra shnehem. The Korei should read Zecher and Zecher, right? The question now is, what does that mean? How is the Baal Korei supposed to do this? Is he supposed to say, read the Pasuk until he gets to the word Zecher, pause, and then say Zecher? Or should he read the Pasuk again? The minhag nowadays is to read the Pasuk twice. The Pasuk is read twice, once with a Tzedeh under the Zion, and once with a Segol under the Zion, to be sure that we've read it properly. But everybody in this room Let the man depaleg. Everybody here has zecher. There's no debate, there's no dispute, but in any event, this is the practice among Ashkenazim. Now, lest you imagine that this is only among Ashkenazim, so I can assure you that there are also parts of the world where Sfaradim also read zecher and zecher, as we will see with the other cases that I'm going to raise. But this is case one. Leave this aside for a minute. It's a very strange practice. Notice the practice says that when we read this parsha, we read from the Torah, we read the same verse twice. Do we ever, at any other time, read a verse twice in the Torah?
You don't even do it when you read Ki as part of the regular cycle. You just do it when you read Parshat Zohar.
Yeah, we don't. That's right, which is even which is very strange. Which is very strange. We'll have to talk about it. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. All right. We'll come back to it. Just want to, now first we're going to do a little accounting, make sure we compare our Tanakhs. Do repeat what? All right, let's take a look. But do you repeat Zecher and Zecher? It also occurs in Exodus. You don't repeat Zecher and Zecher. You don't. Let me tell you, there are people who do. Okay. All right. Don't worry about it. Well, I'm going to come back to it. Just put a hold on it. I'll come back to it. Don't worry. The question is why? Why do we read this pasuk twice? We don't read any other pasuk twice. Psua Daka, which some Sifrei Torah have with an aleph and some have with a hey, and there are Jews who pronounce aleph and hey differently. It's not read twice. Why not? We'll come to an amazing verse which may surprise some of you. And now, Megillat Esther, would you open up to Megillat Esther, chapter 1, verse 22. Megillat Esther 1. וישלח ספרים אל כל מדינות המלך ומדינה ומדינה כי כתבדה ואלם ועם כלשונו להיות כל איש. And what does everybody in this room have in their Tanakhs? Sorer. Everybody has Sorer. Sin Reish Reish. Any disputes? All right. In many synagogues it is read Shorer. Liot kol ish shorer b'veito u'medaber k'lshon amo. Never heard that? No. All right.
Maybe Moroccan.
We'll come back to it. Remember this. Okay, that's number 2. Megillat Esther 8:11. Perek Chet, Pasuk Yud Aleph. 8:11. אשר נתן המלך ליהודים אשר בכל עיר ועיר להיקהל ולעמוד על נפשם להשמיד. What do you have after להשמיד? Everybody has Vilaharog? Wonderful. Slowly, now I really want to find out. Slowly. Some of you have Lashmid, Laharog? Who, just raise your hands. Laha, who has Laharog? Which Tanakh do you have? Is that the Shul's Tanakh? Or? But
That should be Sinai.
right, it's a Jewish Bible. Fine, okay. we have one with Laharog. Any other Laharogs? You have Laharog? And what are you using? You're using also?
No.
What you?
That's the Jewish Family Bible, London edition, revised by M. Friedlander. Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. All right. Very good. Anyway, so about some of you have. Look at it carefully. Lashmid, Laharog, Ulabeid, and the rest of you obviously have Lashmid, Vilaharog, Ulabeid. You have a vav. That's not what's called Matrix Lectionis. That's not Amot HaKriya. That's not an Aim HaKriya. That vav is not a vav like in the word, for example, sorer, where it could have been spelled sin vav reish reish or sin reish reish, and we don't care very much. We don't possibly sefer if it's missing a vav. That's a vocalic vav. The vav is there to tell me how to pronounce the word. But if I have a vav missing in vilaharog, and half of you have it missing, and there's half the people in this room have a pasul Megillat Esther, apparently. That's what it sounds like. Because it's one way or the other. Either the vav should be there and you're missing it, so it's a sefer chaser, or the vav is not there. All right? Well, I'm sorry?
I said last week we found out that all our Megillat.
That's right, not just Megillat Esther. Right. What?
Megillat Esther doesn't come in.
L'chatchila, absolutely. L'chatchila, you cannot add a letter or take any sefer that's chaser or yeter. L'chatchila is pasul.
But if you happen to come
Thi-
across one where it's missing,
That's
you can still read
you
it.
can still read, but l'chatchila, when you examine the sefer and pick to read, it's a clear siman in Hilchot Megillah. You must use a kosher Megillah. I just told you, we had it last week. If you don't have the psuchot and stumot correct in the Megillah is pasul, psula. Today, it's psula. It's l'chatchila. B'diavad, you yotzei the kriya. We don't make you read it again. But the answer is l'chatchila, it's psula. Okay, so we have some problem here with 8:11. We'll have to come back to it. Now, 9:2, and that'll be the last one we'll look at for today. 9:2. Will be enough to deal with these cases. Nikalu HaYehudim Ba'areihem 9:2. B'chol midot HaMelech Asherosh l'shloach yad b'mvakshei ra'atam v'ish lo amad. Now what do we have? All right, we have a mixed chorus over here. All right, so about half of you have apparently bifnehem, and half of you have lufnehem. That's not amot hakriya. So you have here either a lamed or a bet. Something's not in order here. So half the Tanakhs, you're walking around. Here, these are your official Tanakhs. You buy in a Sfarim store. Disagree with each other. So we don't have to look very far. Now the question is, of course, what do you do on Purim? Purim, you come to shul, and the Baal Koreh reads from a Megillah, and you know how careful we are, and women listen to the Megillah, and men listen to the Megillah, and you have to have a Megillah that's Kshera. What are you going to do? You can't write a Lamed and a Beis with a slash between them and have your choice. You can only write a Megillah one way or the other. Ah, who said that? Really? Do we have anybody who davens in this kehillah?
Yeah, we don't say fine.
Sfaradim don't say anything twice. Ashkenazim do. And we're going to have to wonder why. Why do Ashkenazim say it twice? Sfaradim don't say it twice. Now, the question is, what do you have in your Megillah? Do you have the Lamed or the Beis? But Sfaradim don't read it twice. And let me show you, Sfaradim know what they're doing. They don't read it twice. The Ashkenazim, they have serious problems, as we will see. Yes.
Isn't it true, though, that the things in Megillat Esther in chapter 8 and chapter 9 that you just read are universally done by all Ashkenazim everywhere and are listed in the back of the current Tanakh
No.
with various readings?
Let's
Whereas
take
the
it.
Zecher and Zecher is not listed as not an accepted varied reading. And like I said, the proof of the pudding is that when you read it as part of the regular cycle, you don't double.
Oh. Good question. Give me a chance, and we're going to examine each one of these cases to see what the real history is. Okay, what happened? Okay. We'll start with Zecher.
The meanings of the thing?
Well, there's absolutely no difference in meaning between Zecher with a Tzera and Zecher with a Segel. Yes. I mean, in that case, not in the other cases. Could have a slight difference in meaning. Yes. Yeah. But Zecher, no, you will talk about it. But Zecher, as a matter of fact, Sfaradim, as you well know, do not differentiate between Kamatz and between Segel and Seder. So it's irrelevant. For them, it's not a problem. It is a problem. In all likelihood. And I would tend to agree with you. That is, it shouldn't matter after the fact. Still initially, you want to read the Torah properly. The Torah has, after all, the Torah has ta'amim, the Torah has vocalization, and of course, l'chatchila, we always want to read everything properly, correctly.
The thing about Zecher is brought in Shulchan Aruch, you said?
It's brought in Mishnah Brura. the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen. So it's... No, absolutely not. Shulchan Aruch only says that we read Parshat Zachor on Parshat Zachor. That's right. The question is, where does this originate? Notice the Mishnah Berurah gives no source. He just says, Yesh Omrim, doesn't identify who the Yesh Omrim is. Some people read it Zecher, some people read it Zecher, and he leaves it at that. The book was published about 150 years ago called Maaseh Rav. Maaseh Rav are the practices of the Gaon of Vilna. The practices of the Gaon of Vilna, not as recorded by the Gaon of Vilna himself, but as his disciples who knew him, each one was consulted and asked, what do you remember in terms of the halachic practices of the Gaon of Vilna, minhagim of the Gaon of Vilna, and so on. All these were gathered together and published in a book called Maaseh Rav. And certainly the Gaon of Vilna is a paradigm that one could use to know what to do and what not to do with regard to Jewish practice. In Sefer Maaseh Rav, on the section dealing with Kriyat HaTorah, we read as follows. Kishehu korei Parashat Zachor, the Gaon of Vilna himself used to read Parashat Zachor publicly. In other words, he got the Aliyah and he read that Parasha and was motzi the kahal. Kishehu korei Parashat Zachor, korei Zecher b'Segol, Pachat HaZayim. Here we have testimony. Students of the Gaon said that when he read Parshat Zachor, he used to read Timche et Zecher Amalek. That's at Deuteronomy 25. Timche et Zecher with two segols Amalek. So it says in the body of the book. The beginning of the book, Maaseh Rav, the author of the Maaseh Rav went to the greatest of the disciples of the Gaon of Vilna, Reb Chaim Volozhin, the founder of the Volozhin Yeshiva, and asked him for a letter of recommendation. So at the beginning of the book, there's a letter of recommendation from Chaim Volozhin. And in the letter of recommendations, which says what a wonderful book this is, he then says, however, that's from Chaim Volozhin, however, Asher katav likrot Parshat Zachor zecher b'sheish nekudot. You write that you heard the Gaon say that the Gaon read Parshat Zachor and he read zecher. Ani shamati mipeh kadosh. I heard the Gaon reading Parshat Zachor. I, Reb Chaim Volozhin. Ani shamati mipeh kadosh shekara b'chamesh nekudot. When I heard the Vilna Gaon, he said zecher. Zayin with a tzera. V'lo yadati, and I don't know, im hashom'im sham'u v'ta'u, I don't know if the people you consulted who heard the Gra didn't hear properly. It's possible. I'm telling you, I'm eyewitness. I heard, he said zecher. So it could be that the people who you consulted didn't hear properly, v'ta'u, lomar b'shesh nekudot, o ulai b'ziknuto chazar bo. And what this means is the Chaim Volozhin only knew the Gaon in his last years, the last years of the Vilna Gaon's life. So what Chaim Volozhin said is it's possible that the people that testified to you, they heard the Gaon of Vilna read this Parsha, who knows, in 1770 or so. The Vilna Gaon died in 1797. And I heard the Vilna Gaon in 1796. And Chazar Bo, in his old age, I heard him a year before he died. A year before he died, he read Zecher. I heard him say Zecher. So it's possible that at an earlier stage in his life, he felt that the correct reading is Zecher. This is what we find in the letter of Reb Chaim Volozhin. Now, you asked about what about Ashkenazim? Let's see what Ashkenazim do. You can't judge by what Ashkenazim do in 1996. Ashkenazim are very confused in 1996. If you want to know what Ashkenazim do and did, you have to go back to the 12th century, 13th century, 14th century and find out what Ashkenazim did or didn't do. And now I'll tell you some interesting things. First of all, right here in Washington Heights in Manhattan, there is a community, the known as the Breuer community. That is the synagogue that continues the traditions of Samson Raphael Hirsch and Minig Frankfurt, the Minhagim of Frankfurt. They don't read Zecher and Zecher. They just read Zecher with its Seirah. No debate. These are Ashkenazim. Right? They don't know anything about this ruling of, or if they know about it, they disregard it. And you know, these Germans are very careful. They preserve their traditions exactly as they heard their father and grandfather say it. And it's not only in Frankfurt. In many other small towns in Germany, the minig was to read Zecher, and they continue to read Zecher. And notice in all Chumashim, what does it say? Zecher. Nobody here had Zecher. Everybody has Zecher. In the first edition of the Hebrew Bible, the first Mikraot Gedolot, and the second Mikraot Gedolot, all the great editions of the Hebrew Bible going back to Bamberg in Venice in the 16th century, all of them read Zecher. In the Mikraot Gedolot text that we use today, in everybody, Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, namely the Mikraot Gedolot, which was edited by Yaakov ben Chaim, 1525, the so-called Second Rabbinic Bible, it says Zecher. That Bible was then commented upon by the greatest Masoretic halachists through the generations. I'm going to mention three. I'm sure we mentioned them earlier, but I'll just remind you of the three major figures that we rely upon, everybody, Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, for our biblical texts. Reb Menachem di Lonzano. Reb Menachem di Lonzano wrote a sefer called Or Torah. He was in Italy, in Turkey, and in Jerusalem. He traveled the world over. It was mostly in Jerusalem. Reb Menachem di Lonzano, who lived in the 16th century, in the beginning of the 17th century. He dies about 1620 or so. Reb Menachem di Lonzano in his Or Torah wrote his Or Torah to make corrections on Yaakov ben Chaim's Mikraot Gedolot, the famous rabbinic Bible that we all copy to this day. Anybody who has in their house a Mikraot Gedolot that looks like this cover look? Not the cover. Some biblical passages here. This edition of Mikraot Gedolot, this is really a Warsaw print, but this is the same as Yaakov ben Chaim, 1525, with the corrections of the three great Masoretes. One of them is Menachem di Lonzano Or Torah. So he corrected the text. He made no correction here. It said in Deuteronomy 25, Zecher, he left it Zecher. He felt that was correct. The second great Masoretic scholar and also halachist was Minchat Shai, who was a contemporary of Menachem di Lonzano, Reb Shlomo Yedid the Norzi, who lived in Italy and died in 1616. And in his Minchat Shai, he also wrote it to make corrections on the rabbinic Bibles. There were many printers error in the earlier Bibles and errors of vocalization, so he made corrections. No correction here. Everybody agrees, Peh Echad, everybody agrees it is Zecher with its Seirah. And the third great Masoretic halachist was in a different part of the world in the 19th century, Reb Shlomo Ganzfried in the Keset HaSofer, and we write all Sifrei Torah today. Ashkenazim and Sfardim follow this type of Sefer Torah based on these three great halachists who made the corrections on the Masoretic Bible, and he also made no correction here. Everybody agreed it is Zecher. That's it. And the Sof Pasuk, which is why, as you say, when we read Kriyat Torah, we usually, as far as you've seen, don't read this Pasuk twice. I have to tell you that there are groups of Ashkenazim who, when they read Kriyat Torah on those Parshiot, not just on Parshat Zachor, but when they read the Parshiyot in Sefer Shmot and in Sefer Dvarim that have the Pasuk Zecher Amalek, many read the Pasuk twice even there, even though you haven't seen it, but I can assure you that that's the case, especially amongst Hasidim. Anyway, all texts read Zecher, apparently, so far. Doesn't matter. You heard this practice of reading the Pasuk twice. Where does the practice come from? Well, it doesn't begin before the 19th century. It enters Jewish history for the first time in the 19th century. It enters, as you could already understand from what you've heard now, it enters via Reb Chaim Volozhin and these other traditions about what the Gaon of Vilna read. Did he read Zecher or Zecher? So in Vilna, in Lithuania, there seemed to be some uncertainty as to whether it should be Zecher or Zecher based on this testimony, even though notice Reb Chaim Volozhin said it's absolutely Zecher, right? Didn't matter. Once this happened, next we hear, I'm going to provide a missing link a little later, next we hear, the Mishnah Berurah says, Yesh Omrim, some say this way, some say that way, and therefore the Mishnah Berurah says to be on the safe side, you read it twice, and this has now become the practice of all, or most, Ashkenazim. I'm not sure, but I'd be surprised if he didn't read it twice, because once the Mishnah Berurah says that this was the practice in Lithuania, so in theory it should have been his practice. Now I'm going to show you something. I want to show you how careful you have to be. In other words, in Eretz Yisrael, absolutely, because the first settlers among the Ashkenazim in Eretz Yisrael were the Prushim, that is, the descendants of the Gra, the disciples of the Gra. So they, of more than anybody else, made sure to read Zecher and Zecher to be sure that they were complying with... Yeah, that's true, but then the Sefer Maaseh Rav, which has other eyewitnesses who heard the Gra say the other way, and even if...
Among the Gra's own followers,
there's a dispute.
All go according to the Maaseh Rav. None of them go according to Reb Chaim Volozhin.
No, none of them go according to either of them. What I'm really telling you is Reb Chaim Volozhin said Zecher. Sefer Maaseh Rav, the testimony other than Reb Chaim Volozhin is he said Zecher. And we only read it one way. In order to be sure that nowadays we're doing it according to what the Vilna Gaon wanted, you read it twice. Once one way and once the other way. So in a sense you're following both or neither, however you want to define your terms, right? In other words, Reb Chaim Volozhin only read it once, so far as we know. Those who heard the Gra only read it one way apparently. All those who heard him all those who heard the Gra read it testify they heard him read it one way. He didn't read the pasuk twice. But now we read it twice because we have conflicting testimony as to what they heard. Got it? Okay.
Where would the Vilna Gaon get it from? There's no precedent.
Now let's see. Good question. All right, good question. So listen carefully. And now you'll see that the Sfaradim enter the picture as well. It's quite amazing. Small world. I'm going to remind you of a beautiful Talmudic passage. And as I read you this Talmudic passage and translate it, please remember that the Talmud has no vocalization. There's no kamat seira patach in the Talmud. So that's going to be a factor in everything that I'm reading to you. But the basic story we can follow with some qualification. Here's the story in the Talmud. This is, and you can go look it up on your own, this is the Babylonian Talmud, Bava Batra 21a and b. The Talmud begins by expounding a verse in 1 Kings 11:16. You don't have to look at it now. 1 Kings 11:16, where it says that the commander-in-chief of King David's forces, Yoav ben Tzruya, Joab, was together with Kol Yisrael, Sheshet Chodoshim, Ad Hichrit Kol Zachar. He was 6 months at a certain place, and during those 6 months, he destroyed all the males of an enemy. Ad Yichrit Kol Zachar, all the males. That's in the biblical text. No one here has a different reading in their biblical text. So we don't have to worry about that. Now the Talmud continues. Ki ata lekamei David. When Yoav came to his teacher, to his commander-in-chief and King David, to report what had happened, and he told him, I was there 6 months and I destroyed all the males. Amar le, my taima avadet hachi. So King David turned to Joab and said, why did you kill all the males? That is, why did you kill only males and not females? When we wipe out an enemy of Israel, we wipe out the entire nation. Who told you to wipe out only the males and not the females? Amar le, so Yoav answered, very simple, it's a pasuk in the Torah. Yichtiv, timche et zachar amalek. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Now remember, there are no dots here, so I'm making up this vocalization, but surely that seems to be the plain sense. So Yoav, all right, Yoav, the commander-in-chief, responds to David HaMelech, and he says, You want to know why I killed only males? It's a pasuk. Timche et zachar Amalek. Marley. So David HaMelech answered. You see, once upon a time, Jews knew Tanakh. Marley v'hanan zecher karina. What do you mean you killed all the males because it says Timche et zachar Amalek? We read Timched Zecher Amalek. There's no dots here, so this is not going to solve the problem of whether it's a Tzera or a Segel. But the sense is Timched Zecher Amalek, the memory of Amalek. Wipe out all of Amalek. Amalek. We read Zecher. Amarle. Joab was no fool, so what did Joab answer? Amarle. Anna Zachar Akriyon. My teacher taught me to read Zachar. It's a beautiful passage. You see, in Tanakh, and of course in the times of the Talmud, there were no Nekudot. No such thing as Nekudot. There was no Patach Tzera Kamatz. All you had is Hebrew, the way modern Hebrew newspapers are, and the way most Sfarim are, without vocalization, right? So the Gemara says here that Yoav answered, it's true, you have a tradition that it's Timched Zecher Amalek. But my teacher, I went to Magen David, and my teacher taught me Zachar. You can't argue with me. My teacher taught me this. Azal Shayle Lerabe. So the Gemara says he went. We don't know who the subject of he is. He is either Yoav or David HaMelech. The Rishonim dispute. Plain sense, it's really Yoav. But Azal Shayle Lerabe. Anyway, once King David set him straight, Yoav decided to go visit his old school, and he probably got an honorary medal or something, graduate degree from the institution. He came back, famous general now, and he seeks out his old teacher who taught him in the first grades, and obviously who had taught him, as he said, Timche et Zachar Amalek. He finds his old teacher. Azal Shaila the Rabbi, Amarle Heyach Akritan. How did you teach us 45 years ago in school to read this pasuk? Amarle, now I have to tell you, it says Zayin Chafresh in the Talmud here, so no vocalization. But I can tell from the context, probably, there are many different ways of reading this Talmudic passage, but the plain, simplest way, most of you Rishonim read it, Amarle Zachar. Yoav was right. His teacher was still teaching the same way. The teacher taught him all those years ago mistakenly, Zachar. So the Talmud goes on and says, Shakal Safsira Lemikale, he drew his sword, and he was about to slay his teacher. Amarle Amai, so the teacher said, just because I didn't teach you properly, you're drawing your sword. This is not a capital offense. Amarle dichtiv arur oseh melechet Hashem remiyah. He cites a famous verse from Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, that cursed is anyone who doesn't teach properly, who does melechet Hashem, which means a teacher, remiyah. So a very clever teacher answered, Amarle shavke lahu gavra delikum be'arur. The verse says, curse. So you want to curse me, that's perfectly fine. But put your sword away. It doesn't say anywhere in the verse that you can take my life. Amarle ktiv arur monea charbo midam. It says right there in Yirmiyahu, cursed is he who doesn't use the sword when he should. Ika di amri katle, ika di amri lo katle. So there are two traditions. Some say that Yoav did slay his teacher, and some say he didn't slay his teacher. I always assume that he didn't slay his teacher because the teacher probably told Yoav that incompetent teachers, you see, can be retrained, can teach correctly. A dead teacher, there's nothing you can do with a dead teacher. So what? Okay, that's one way of reading it. I tell you beforehand that in the Rishonim there are other ways of reading this Talmudic passage, other very interesting ways of reading the Talmudic passage. Some of the interesting commentaries on this Talmudic passage say that indeed the teacher taught him Zachar, and Yoav remembered Zachar. That wasn't what the teacher was punished for. Every teacher can make an honest mistake. You know, you don't put teachers to death for teaching misinformation. But that the teacher never corrected Yoav. All those years, that was the mistake of the teacher, that he allowed David HaMelech to read it wrongly, and he never corrected David HaMelech, or didn't watch carefully to see what David HaMelech was saying. This is what troubled David HaMelech. In other words, let me explain to you how others vocalized this Gemara. Yoav came to the teacher and he asked the teacher, how did you read this verse? And you know what the teacher said? Zecher. The teacher knew what it was, and the teacher had taught him correctly the first time around. But he never corrected David in the exercises. David kept reading it Zachar, and the teacher had never corrected him. So for that, Yoav had never been corrected by the teacher. For that, the teacher was punished. Nothing wrong with misteaching, but there is something wrong with not correcting students when students make errors. Students make errors in your presence. That's how others read this Talmudic passage as a sample. Okay. But I have to tell you, I brought with me a fairly rare book. This is a printed edition of a book that was printed by Sfaradim, based on Sephardic manuscripts of the Talmud. The book is called Haggadot HaTalmud. It was printed in Constantinople in Reish Ayin Aleph. So Reish Ayin Aleph would be, about 1511 or so. This is one of the first printed books. This is a reprint of one of the first printed books. Haggadot HaTalmud Likeit Chacham Sfaradi Lo Noda Shmo. It says written by a Chacham Sfaradi. We don't know who did it. An anonymous Sfaradi gathered together all the Agadic passages from the Bavli, put them together, a kind of what we call today the Ein Yaakov. This is not the Ein Yaakov. This is a different work. And when you open this up to Baba Batra, to the story that I just read to you from the Talmud, it has the whole story, but of course, remember, these books are published without vocalization. So this Sfaradi, when he told the story, since it has no vocalization, he put in the words Tzera and Segol, etc., wherever they needed to be put in. Now listen to what I'm going to read to you, the key line from the story here. My time avadat hachi, David HaMelech turns to him and says, why did you kill the males only? Perush, shelo harakta hanekevot. Amar lei, dichtiv, timche et, and then it says, zayin chafresh amalek. Presumably Zachar Amalek. Amar lei. David answered, Anan zecher karinan besegol. Pass it around for you to look at. Don't take my word for anything. Anan zecher karinan. I underlined it on the. Anan zecher karinan. We read zecher besegol.
Maybe he meant to segol under the top instead of zachar. No, that's not what.
No.
No?
I don't think so. Now, maybe I'll be able to bring some evidence for that. But I just want to show you that. Yeah. Here again. We have the Rashba preserved. I'll pass this around for people who want to look at it. Rashba, of course, is Reb Shlomo Ibn Adret from Spain, 1300 or so. And he also reads, we have preserved the Rashba's commentary on Baba Batra, and he says, Zecher besegol karinan. Yes. And yeah, what would that mean? Meaning the smichut of Zachar. Who? Okay, but what is? That would be the mistake. That would be Yoav's mistake. Zichar would be a shva under the Zayin. If you're assuming that in smichut, the absolute form Zachar with two kamatzes would become Zichar. That's what you're suggesting. Zichar Amalek. If that's the case, so that would be Yoav's mistake. No teacher would have thought of that. Yoav would have misread it, perhaps. That's possible. Okay, but you haven't accomplished anything. Either way, either way, it remains Yoav's mistake. It's not what he could have. That's not what David HaMelech was telling him. That's for sure. Okay. Yeah, I want to show you that we have ancient evidence from the medieval period for a segol, and now I'm going to bring you one more piece of evidence. This is the most ancient evidence that we have for this kind of reading, so this answers your question. Do we have any evidence? Yes, we do have evidence for Zecher. And where is it? It's in a book by Rabbi David Kimchi, the Radak. Radak was one of the great commentators on the Bible. He spent time mostly in France, but he spent some time in Spain as well. He was a great French scholar, and Radak lives in the 13th century, end of the 12th and first half of the 13th century. And Radak wrote a grammar called Sefer HaSharashim, which I'm holding in my hand. And under the root Zayin Chaf Reish in Sefer HaSharashim of the Radak, listen carefully, it says as follows: Timche et Zecher Amalek, with two segols, one under the Zayin and one under the Chaf. Timche et Zecher Amalek, and in case you have any doubts about it, it says B'sheish Nekudot. B'sheish Nekudot. All right, Dvarim Chaf He Yutet, B'sheish Nekudot. Kain hu b'miktzat sfarim. That's what he found in some manuscripts of the Torah. U'b'miktzat sfarim zeicher b'chamesh nekudot. We'll pass this around so you can see the testimony for yourself. So already in the 13th century, we have a tradition preserved by the Radak that some Bible manuscripts read zeicher and some read zecher. So there's room here for whatever the testimony was regarding the Gaon of Vilna. Yes.
I'm surprised that the Shulchan Aruch,
Right. Right.
Because he's a Sfaradi and...
No, I want to explain to you again. The Shulchan Aruch only says that you're supposed to read Parshat Zachor and Parshat Zachor. The Rabbi Yosef Karo himself doesn't say a word about whether it's Zecher or Zecher. That was a commentary. I was reading from a commentary, a 19th, or late 19th, early 20th century commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura is the one who says that we read the pasuk twice. He's an Ashkenazi, and he's basing himself, in the first instance, on testimony regarding how the Vilna Gaon read. What I just tried to show you was that we actually have much earlier evidence that there was some problem whether to read Zecher or Zecher.
What does it mean by Yesh Omrim? Even the Radak himself said there's some manuscripts, not...
Yeah, he wasn't referring, believe me, he wasn't referring to Radak. He was referring to the two traditions in terms of how the Gra read this. He was, the Chafetz Chaim, the Mishnah Brura, had in mind the fact that Rav Chaim Volozhin said he heard him read Zecher, and somebody else heard him read Zecher, so he couldn't make up his mind whether it's 6 dots or 5 dots. And the Mishnah Brura says, and it sounds like he originated this. Before we leave tonight, you'll find out that he didn't originate it, but it sounds like that it's the Mishnah Brura himself who originated the practice of reading the pasuk twice, because the Vilna Gaon didn't read it twice, and Rav Chaim didn't read it twice, presumably, and those other testimonies didn't read it twice. The first evidence for reading twice comes from the Mishnah Brura.
So you mentioned the Sephardim also got involved. How did they get involved?
Yeah, I'll come to it. I'll come to it shortly. Okay. In this instance, the only way the Sephardim are involved is that there seems to be some evidence relating to Sephardim rather than Ashkenazim that Zachar was written with a segol. Zachar was written with a segol. It's not strong evidence. And here I also want to be unequivocal in terms of Masoretic matters. We have a principle, and remember this principle. The principle is, in reading a Sefer Torah, or in writing a Tanakh, and in reading a Parsha from Tanakh, we follow the Balei HaMesorah. That's the principle. Even if the Talmud says otherwise, even if the Halakha says otherwise, the rule is we follow the Balei HaMesorah. And the Balei HaMesorah means that 1525 edition of Tanakh, which was based on Masoretic texts, it means following Minchat Shai, those 3 famous Masoretes that I mentioned, who devoted their lives to establishing the correct reading and pronunciation of Tanakh, and to find the best texts that are closest to the best scribes that were once in Tiberias, namely the Ben Asher family, and to, in fact, as best as possible, to follow the Aleppo Codex wherever they could. That's what we follow to this day. Now, the answer is, let's take a look at the Aleppo Codex, right? Well, but you all know a lot more than that. We don't have the Aleppo Codex to Deuteronomy 25, right? So the Aleppo Codex is not, what do you know now? Where we're going to look? We have Reb Shalom Shachna Yellen, who sent his son-in-law and to examine every reading and list them of the Aleppo Codex. And we don't even have to look at the Aleppo Codex here, because I already got finished telling you that every great Masoreid who ever lived, including the 1525 edition, followed by Minchat Shai, followed by Or Torah, all these people having looked at many manuscripts. Zecher, or is it Zecher? Zecher, with 5 dots, answer Cain. They looked at the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex has Zecher, Zayin with the Tzeda, Chaf with a Segel. There's no question in the world that Al Pi Halacha, and according to the Balei HaMesorah, since the Halacha is we follow Balei HaMesorah and nothing but Balei HaMesorah, the answer is the correct reading here is Zecher, and that's why all Sfaradim don't read this pasuk twice. There's no reason in the world to read it twice. They read it once. It was only the Ashkenazim who instituted, at a very late period, to read this pasuk twice. And you already heard when the Ashkenazim instituted it, that is sometime in the 19th or 20th century. Shorer, Megillat Esther 122. Shorer, will you take a look again? Okay. We have Sorer. Now here it is, just an unbelievable error. I'm amazed that anybody in the world, and I hear it. It happens to be in the synagogue that I attend in Kew Gardens Hills, New York. They read Shorer every when they read Megillat Esther. And since I've never given this lecture in my own synagogue, so they don't know any reason to do it otherwise. Your text reads Sorer. Liot Kolish Sorer, Sorer from Lashon Srara, to rule, to lord it over, so that every man shall rule in his own home. Kolish Sorer Beveit Tov. By the way, those who read Shorer, or I can't guarantee for all the people, I think some of them think that they're reading, that he should, whatever it means, he should sing in his house, which he'll whistle or something, which may be senseless. But those who know a little more Hebrew understand Shorer as what's called a Polel form from Shur, those who oversee their house. Shorer from Lashon Shur, those, which in a sense will come out to mean pretty much what Sorer means anyway. But where do we find Shorer? No Masoretic manuscript in the world reads Shorer. Period. It's ridiculous to even think of reading it that way. However, it's wonderful what you find in Jewish literature, so I brought a sefer with me called Likutei Minhagim. I'll pass it around to whoever wants to look at it. And in Sefer Likutei Minhagim, page 4a, it says as follows. B'kriyat HaMegillah, B'pasuk liot kolish sorer b'veito, Megillat Esther 122. Rov ha'olam omrim b'sin smolit. Most of the world reads it as a sin. V'hu ta'ut. Tzarich lomar shorer. And now I know why in Kew Garden Hills they read it this way. Tzarich lomar shorer. You're supposed to read it shorer. B'shin yimanit. V'chein ita b'feirush b'mesorah. And it actually says it in the Masoretic notes that you're supposed to read Shorer. V'chein kara harav hakadosh rabban shekol b'nei hagadol Rabbeinu Shalom Mibelz. Belz the Rebbe says you're supposed to read Shorer. V'aperush mit lashon mashgiach k'mo ashurena etc. U'mi sheyirtzeh shelo levatel haminhag. If you don't want to be mevatel the old minhag of reading Sorer, you see, there's only one right way of reading it according to this, that's Shorer. But if you want to keep up the minhag of the Rov Olam that reads Sorer, which is everybody in this room apparently, Yikra Pasuk Zeh Pamayim. Here you have the notion of reading a pasuk twice. Read this pasuk twice. Pam achat kefi ha-mesorah, namely shorer, pam achat kefi ha-minhag. We'll pass this around so you can take a look at it if you want. That's a source from the beginning of this century, 1900. The testimony about Reb Shalom Abel gets you back to the 19th century. So already in the 19th century, here's another pasuk in the Megillat Esther that was being read twice. Now I have a Megillat Esther with me that is a Tanakh Mikrot Gedolot with the Mesorah. So I want to show you what happened here. This is absolutely amazing. And you go home, you look at your Mikrot Gedolot. Esther 122, and you won't find this in any book anywhere. Liot Kalish Sorer Beveito. All right, which we all have. No one has a different reading. Now there is a Masoretic note. That's the beauty of owning this edition of Mikrot Gedolot, by the way, is that you have the Mesorah Ktana and the Mesorah Gdolah on every page. Many new editions of Mikrot Gedolot don't have this. This is the edition, and the only edition that's printed today that has the Masoretic notes. Now, it says right next to the word, there's a circle on top of Sorer, which means there's a Masoretic note. And the Masoretic note reads as follows. Lamed, I'll explain in a minute. What is Lamed? Leta. Okay, what does Leta mean? Only one. Lamed, Ktiv, and then it says Shin Yud Nun, or Sin Yud Nun, depending on how you want to look at it. Leta, Ktiv, Shin. Now, whenever a word occurs only once in all of Tanakh, when I say a word, I mean that particular form of the word. So, for example, Sorer, Sorer, vocalized, Sorer, spelled Sin Resh Resh, occurs nowhere else in all of Tanakh. You go home, take out a concordance if you want, you will not find Sorer anywhere else. Whenever you have a word like that in the Masoretic note, immediately says Leta. There'll be a little dot. And the Masoretes in the 10th century wrote these notes so that you could be sure to spell the word properly, and they write Leta, meaning that's how you spell this word, and it has no parallel anywhere in Tanakh. There's no other word like this in Tanakh. Any place else in Tanakh, if you have Sin Resh Resh, it's not going to be Sorer. It'll be Sharar, it'll be something else, won't be Sorer. This is unique for Tanakh. But it doesn't just say Leta. It says Leta Ktiv Shin Yud Nun. All right? Now, somebody who knows nothing about Masoretic text, in this particular case it seems clear, somebody connected with bells, read this to read Leta Ktiv Sin. Nowhere in Tanakh does this word occur with a sin. Let active sin. So, but it says here Shin Resh Resh. Answer, what is it? Shin. Shorer. Let active sin. But that's not what this Masoretic note says. Somebody misread it that way. What this Masoretic note says is let active shin. The word sorer nowhere else occurs with a shin. Period. There is one other word that occurs in Tanakh, pronounced the same way, sorer, like this, but instead of sin reish reish, it's samech reish reish. It only occurs once. It's an echa. Right? So that's what it says here is, now, if you're an expert in Tanakh and you're writing Tanakh, how are you going to remember whether sorer is with a sin, or sorer is with a samech? So there's a note at each place. Here there's a note that says, this one is with a sin. There is no other place in all of Tanakh that there's a letter, the word shin reish reish with a sin or a shin. Either way, with a three-pronged letter that we call shin or sin. The reason how to add those two words with a shin or sin is because there is another word sorer, exactly sorer, pronounced exactly the same way, with a samach, and that's an echa. That's what this is all about. Somebody who didn't know how to read Hebrew, and didn't know how to read Masoretic notes, got it all confused and decided that this should be shorer. All right, there is no Masoretic manuscript in the world known today that reads shorer over here. It is only sorer, and no reason in the world this pasuk should be read twice. Okay. Now listen, we'll take the last two cases together because they're very easy to do. 8:11 was lahashmid, and then half of you had vilaharog ula'abed, and half of you had lahashmid, laharog ula'abed. Here we have to follow the policy I've been telling you to do all evening, and if you did it, you'd find something quite amazing. The Mikraot Gedolot that we all use today, and these are copies of the 1525 famous Second Rabbinic Bible edited by Yaakov ben Chaim. That's the first great Masoretic Bible. It's the first Hebrew Bible that was printed very carefully together with the Masoretic notes. But the man who did it, as great as he was and as important as he was, Yaakov ben Chaim, was not the greatest expert in the world in Masoretic matters, and he also had limited access to manuscripts. And worse yet, he converted to Christianity, all of which doesn't help too much. So we're still using his text of Tanakh. Every Mikraot Gedolot. Mikraot Gedolot. I'm not talking about little Tanachs that some of you have in front of you. But every Mikraot Gedolot simply repeats the text of the 1525 edition of Tanakh. So if we turn to 8:11, and I'm now going to open up to Esther 8:11, and please look at your Tanachs again. 8:11. I have in Mikraot Gedolot, and all Mikraot Gedolot read, Lashmid, Laharog, Ula'abeid. There's no vav here. All right, others here also have Lashmid, Laharog, if I remember before, Ula'abeid. Esther 8:11. I have Lashmid, Laharog, Ula'abeid. But if you would look in Minchat Shai, and Minchat Shai is printed in the Mikraot Gedolot on Esther. Anybody wants to can come up afterwards and look. Or if you would look at Or Torah, or if you would look at Keset HaSofer, the three great commentaries that came to correct this Tanakh, all three correct it. All three say this is a terrible error. It is not Lashmid, Laharog, Ula'abeid. It has to be corrected. All Ben Asher manuscripts and all good manuscripts of Tanakh read Lashmid, Villaharog, Ula'abeid. Take a look, Minchat Shai. Take a look at Keset HaSofer. Take a look at Or Torah. And those of you who have good Tanakhs already have it. They all say you have to correct the text. The text was never corrected. You follow what I'm saying? The printed text has the same error from 1525. All the Perushim on this verse say it's an error. All the experts agree, Pe'echad, that it has to be Lashmid V'Laharog Ula'abeid. None of them say read the Pasuk twice. Why read the Pasuk twice? That's ridiculous. This is a mistake. Read it correctly. Lashmid V'Laharog Ula'abeid. And the Aleppo Codex, of course, has Lashmid V'Laharog Ula'abeid, based on the testimony of those who saw the Aleppo Codex.
And the Megillot have Vela. The Megillah has both.
Good. Well, Baruch Hashem, you have a kosher Megillah. You have Megillah Kshera. Now check the next one.
It's not like a situation of Kriyuk.
All right. It's not Kriyuk Tiv. No Kriyuk Tiv here. This has nothing to do with Kriyuk Tiv. This is an error that people make. Now let's move to 9.2. Same thing exactly with 9.2. The printed text in 1525 mistakenly read V'ish lo amad bifneihem with a bet. Bifneihem. Minchat Shai, Or Torah, Keset HaSofer, all say they examine the best manuscripts, and the best manuscripts read Lifneihem, and you have to read Lifneihem. And I hope your Megillah has Lifneihem too. It's terrific. Very good. Okay, that is correct. That's how it is in the sources. Where did it come, this minhag to read twice? Very strange. Now, so far, what testimony do we have about reading twice? You only know it from two places if you were listening carefully tonight. Where do you know anywhere? Where did you ever hear that you read a pasuk twice? Where? Well, in Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura, right, said you should read a pasuk twice. That was the first time we heard it. Where else did we hear it? And that's right. It said here that to be Yotzei Kol HaShitot, read it twice. That's around 1900. That's the same time as the Mishnah Brura. Now I can tell you that I can push it back 100 years. And that's it. How can I push it back 100 years? We have incredible testimony, which I will read to you from two Sfarim. And one of the testimonies I'm going to read to you gives us the date when for the first time the pasuk was read twice. So you'll see where it came from. One testimony has to do with the Chatam Sofer. Chatam Sofer is one of the greatest of all Ashkenazim and the greatest poskim of all time. Shilotu Tshuvot Chatam Sofer. He died in 1839. 1839. And here's the testimony from his grandson, who says as follows, the Shevet Sofer. V'gam nahag Adoni Avi Mori Zkeini Zatzal B'veit Midrasho likrot shnei pa'amim hapsukim la'ashmid, laharog, ula'abeid ki nichtav laharog belovav hachibur u'megila shelo nichtav bein hashitot vav hachibur v'kodin odapam v'laharog. So listen carefully. We have a testimony of the grandson of the Chassam Sofer that in the Chassam Sofer's Megillah it said la'ashmid, laharog, ula'abeid, but before the laharog, hanging a little above the laharog, was a vav. And it was the custom of his grandfather, the Chatam Sofer, to read it twice. So he read it once without the vav and once with the vav. Now it continues. V'chein v'pasuk nikalu ha-Yehudim v'ish lo amad lifneihem tluya gam kein ben hashitot. Very strange. Tluya gam kein ben hashitot beit likrot od hapam kol ha-pasuk. And this is certainly the earliest reference to that. This is very nice. So the Chatam Sofer, we have the testimony of his grandson that there were two psukim, 8:11 and 9:2, where the Chatam Sofer read the whole pasuk in both cases twice, once with the vav, once without the vav, once with a bet, and once with a lamed, depending on the case. And that's the practice we still, many Ashkenazim do to this very day. Look at the problem. I want you to understand what's happening here. The Chatam Sofer had the Mikrot Gedolot. He had this text. So we saw in this text, it's the way it's printed. This is a mistaken text. But he couldn't know that this was a mistaken text. All he knew was that this is the famous Mikrot Gedolot. On the other hand, he had access to good Masoretic manuscripts, and he saw that in the Masoretic manuscripts, the difference between the printed text and the Masoretic manuscripts, to be on the safe side, he read these two psukim twice. The Chatam Sofer initiates this, as it were, among Hungarian Jewry sometime before 1839, and it remains a practice to do it for those two psukim, by the way, not for Sorer, and not for any other psukim as far as the Chatam Sofer is concerned. That's Eid Echad. Now we come to Eid Sheni, a different witness, and this is in Lithuania. A book was published in Jerusalem many years ago. It's been reprinted recently. The type has been reset in a beautiful edition. The book is called Sefer HaTzadik Rabbi Yosef Zundel Mesalant. This is a biography of a great rabbi, the teacher of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and the most famous disciple of Reb Chaim Volozhin. Reb Chaim Volozhin himself had a student by the name of Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant, and if you were here last week, Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant was one of those people who signed on the letter in Yerushalayim that we have to get copies of the Aleppo Codex so that we can rewrite all our scrolls according to the Aleppo Codex. That was Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant was very interested in Mesorah and Masoretic matters, but he began his life in Lithuania, where he didn't have access to too many manuscripts. On page 46 of this biography of Hatzadik Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant, we have testimonies, letters written by Rabbi Yosef Zundel, by others, and now this is Rabbi Yosef Zundel speaking himself. They found his letters in Jerusalem, and in one of his notes, in one of his notebooks, they found the following paragraph. גם אני מעיד בתורת עדות שאני בעצמי קראתי בוולוז'ין בבית המדרש בשבת פרשת מטות מעשה, etc. בספר תורה. He used to be the Baal Koreh, Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant, and he describes what happened several times when he used to read a word and there was a problem and what Reb Chaim Volozhin said, etc. and so forth about the problem. He gives various cases. And then he says as follows. He also had a Megillat Esther. ועיינתי בה ומצאתי שהיה כתוב שם ואיש לא עמד בפניהם בבית ושאלתיו. I asked Reb Chaim Volozhin about it. הלא המנחת שי הכריע שצריך לומר לפניהם. I already told you, Minchat Shai and all the other sources say you have to read Lifneihem. You don't follow the printed Mikrot Gedolot. But they happen to have a Megillah one year they were reading from, and the Megillah had Bifneihem, which all the authorities say is wrong. V'gam hereitiv b'minchat shai gufa, and Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant says, I pulled out the Minchat Shai and I showed it to Reb Chaim Volozhin to show him that the Minchat Shai says you have to read this lifneihem, not bifneihem. Ve'amarli, and Reb Chaim Volozhin told me, Ad heina haya min hagol likrot pasuk asher natan beit pa'amim. Reb Chaim Volozhin said, and notice, I'll listen to his language and I'm going to be didactic on his language. Until this day, haya min hagol, it was my minhag, meaning Reb Chaim Volozhin's minhag, likrot pasuk asher natan twice. Asher natan is 8:11. Megillat Esther 8:11. I used to read it twice. Pam echat laharog, upam bet v'laharog. So the Reb Chaim Volozhin used to read one pasuk in the Megillah twice, namely 8:11. Umeata, and now that you showed me another pasuk, lifneihem, lifneihem, yikru gama pasuk nikalu. That is, read this pasuk 9:2. Beit pa'amim, pam achat bifneihem, upam lifneihem. And now Rabbi Yosef Zundel continues, V'zeh haya. The time I read this Megillah, and I was told to do this by Reb Chaim Volozhin, Bishnat Tov Kuf Ayin Daled, 1814. Gives the date. In 1814, Reb Chaim Volozhin himself instituted reading one pasuk twice, and he mentions in 1814 that he already had been reading before that a certain pasuk twice. And the two pasukim are 8:11 and 9:2. This minhag, and when he talks about the one that he already instituted, he calls it minhago, his minhag. So the evidence is fairly clear. The two earliest witnesses are the Chatam Sofer and Reb Chaim Volozhin. And in the case of Reb Chaim Volozhin, it's a little earlier perhaps than the Chatam Sofer, 1814, and one pasuk he read twice before 1814. The pasuk of Shorer Sorer is a mistake. Forget about it. There is only Sorer, there's no Shorer. Zecher Zecher, there is some disputes. We saw Radak already mentioned the possibility of Zecher Zecher, but Lahalacha, no one ever read that twice. It was only read one way until the 19th century, and maybe even later. It is without question the Mishnah Brura, who says against the Vilna Gaon, who only read it one way, and even against Reb Chaim Volozhin and against the other testimony, because the other witnesses all say we heard him read it one way. No one says that he read it twice, and no one says that they read it twice. But the Mishnah Brura says, just to be sure, following the principle, if you like, that was already established by Reb Chaim Volozhin, that when he had doubt, he read it twice. So they read Zecher Zecher twice as well. But the problem is, and you know this from last week's discussion, and now I come to my conclusion. What? It's the problem now. The problem is tremendous. The problem is we have hundreds of differences between manuscripts. No one says that just because there's a difference in the manuscripts, you have to read every manuscript. You'd spend the rest of your life in shul if you wanted to be Yotzei Kol Hashitot, right? There are hundreds of differences. But we have rules. We have halachic rules when you have differences. And what are the rules when you have differences? Holchin Acha Harov. You follow either the majority, or you have to write a Sefer Torah. What are you going to do? You have to write a Sefer Torah, right? So the din is, the general rule always was Holchin Acha Rov, and not just any old Rov of the best manuscripts. And that's what Minchat Shai did, that's what Reb Meir Habelevi Abulafia did, the Yad Ramah and his Masoret Siag LaTorah, and that's what Minchat Shai did, and that's what Or Torah did, and that's what Keset HaSofer did. And all of them, Pe'echad, no one ever says read a pasuk twice. They all said the same thing. You follow the majority of manuscripts, or the correct manuscripts, and you read it correctly. No one said you should read these psukim twice. This is a modern phenomenon. And as I say, of course, you can lean on heavy shoulders here. You have the Chatam Sofer and Reb Chaim Volozhin, and we have the testimony that they are the ones who instituted this in the first instance. Now, I want to spell out that in the case of the Chatam Sofer, I didn't read you the whole passage. The Chatam Sofer said specifically, he's only doing this for himself, in his house. He will not allow this in public shuls. Public shuls should follow halacha and just read it the correct way, whatever we decide is the correct way. All right. So, but no one listened, and people said if the Chatam Sofer did it, it must be good enough for everybody else as well, and they also started reading twice. And of course, Reb Chaim Volozhin made it clear that in 2 instances, and only 2 instances, in Megillat Esther, he would read twice. He certainly didn't say anywhere that Zecher Zecher should be read twice. Yes. He didn't. And I just told you, I think for a very good reason. He didn't want others following this practice. It was a chumrah ba'alma that he followed for himself. That was the point. He didn't think this was something that al pi halacha. And I can even tell you more. I know his shita. His shita was very much to follow the best Masoretic manuscripts. In other words, halacha l'maaseh, when you write a Sefer Torah, you write a Sefer Torah according to the best manuscripts and the majority reading of those manuscripts. You don't read the pasuk twice. Either you have it right or you don't have it right. Either you have a kasher Sefer Torah or you don't have a kasher Sefer Torah. Right. That's just for reading. For reading purposes, he was machmir al atzmo. He made it very clear, I'm telling you. And the grandson spells this out.
Why did he take it if Hatam Sofer didn't want it?
Reb Chaim Volozhin is a separate case. And in the case of Reb Chaim Volozhin, who didn't have too many manuscripts, I can only assume the following. He was torn between Mikraot Gedolot, which he thought was authoritative, the printed text, Mikraot Gedolot, which we still have. Our Mikraot Gedolot still print mistaken readings. No Megillah is allowed to be written today, according to what the Mikraot Gedolot prints. So he was torn between what would be viewed as one official authority, the received printed biblical texts, and he had a real Megillah in front of him that read differently. Didn't know what. So his answer was, in these 2 cases, which, don't forget, if you add a letter or take away a letter, we're not talking now about a tzera or a sego. Here we're talking about changing the nusach of the text. These 2 cases, he wanted to be on the safe side, and so he called for reading it twice. And notice reading the whole pasuk twice. Spelled out in this case again.
So what happens is when you read it twice,
Right.
you're adding a letter to the Megillah.
You're adding a whole.
Or you read it from a different
Well,
Megillah that's different.
you're reading a whole verse twice. On
No,
the,
but how's it written in the verse? You're just adding a letter here or taking off a letter?
oh, Enochinami, that's right. You're reading. It's like in that sense, it's like a krei and a ktiv. It's like a krei and a ktiv. There is such a phenomenon. In other words, you read out loud one way, but it's written another way. There's such a phenomenon. That's what happens here. Right, it's very strange, but Reb Chaim Volozhin knew how to learn. You don't have to worry about it. Right? All right, so you have.
It's not Kriya. It's not a Kriya.
It's not.
It's not a Kriya.
No, he's asking. Let's say your Megillah said Bifnehem, right? Now you're going to read it by heart and you're going to say Lifnehem. It's not in the text that you're reading. In that, as I'm saying, in that sense, your Yotze, it's like a Krei and a Ktiv.
It's like.
I said it's like, only like. It's not a Krei and a Ktiv.
But it
Okay.
was not blessed as a Kriya of Seed.
No, absolutely not. No. Chas v'shalom. Okay. Now I want you to know, B'kitzur, I have an amazing book here, and I don't want to take the time to read it. Who adds many more verses you should read twice in Megillat Esther. All wrong. I don't even have to mention it. Nowadays, everybody's adding more and more verses. Reb Chaim only spoke of 2 verses. The Chatam Sofer only spoke of the same 2 verses, as a matter of fact. These 2 great Gedolim who instituted this practice for the first time in the 19th century said it for 2 verses alone. Nowadays, people have gone off the beaten path, and wherever they find these kinds of differences, they're reading verses twice and so on. And now I want to tell you why this is terrible and wrong. And you already know why from last week, and then I'll take questions. We have the Aleppo Codex. Whatever doubts we had, we have the best manuscript in the world of Tanakh today. It's not even doubt anymore. We can check every one of these readings. And anyway, the halacha has always been, if you have the best manuscript, you read according to the best manuscript. Gamarnu. No other minhagim. None of this business of reading all kinds of different... Because let me tell you something. If you're worried about all the readings, then you already know from last session, as a matter of fact, the Aleppo Codex, which we have, has other readings that are different, both in Megillat Esther and in the Torah, and much more important readings than anything you heard today. So if we're going to start and say the principle is, wherever you have some doubt, you have to read the pasuk twice, there are much more serious psukim that you're going to have to read twice. Much more serious matters. That posel of Sefer Torah. So to give you the simplest sample, and I think I spoke about this, open up your Chumashim right now to Genesis 9. Open. 9:29. Bereshit 9:29. We'll take a survey first, okay? You're going to have a now. Listen carefully. We're talking about the Torah now. In the Torah, as in the rest of Tanakh, but especially in the Torah, if you're missing one letter, or if you add a letter to a Sefer Torah, the Sefer Torah is pasul, and you're not allowed to read through it publicly, and you're not allowed to make a bracha. No birchat Torah, and that's why we close the Sefer Torah when we find a mistake in it. If you add a letter, or if you subtract a letter, I'm not talking about chaser v'yeter. I'm not talking about amot hakriya, a vav or yud in the middle of a word. All right, so 9:29. What do you have? First word. Vayehi. Everybody has Vayehi.
I have IU.
You've been different tonight many times. And once again, you have Vayehu. What are you reading from? Go ahead. All right, you have Biblia Hebraica, and that happens to be a Ben Asher manuscript, what's known as B19A. This is a famous Ben Asher manuscript that was in Russia, Leningrad, and you have a printed text. So what do you have? That's a good Ben Asher manuscript. Vayehu. What is there? Everybody else here has Vayehi? Everybody has Vayehi? I have another manuscript. This is called the State Bible, and I have Vayehu. So we have two Vayehus here. Don't worry about grammar here. We're worried about we're worried about the Kabbalah. Okay. Vayehu. I have Vayehu. You have Vayehu. I have a British Museum manuscript, a Ben Asher manuscript. You have the Leningrad manuscript, which is a Ben Asher manuscript. Now, before I say another word, I want you to understand the seriousness of this. The meaning is no great difference. It's a singular or a plural. Vayehi kol yemei Noach or Vayehu kol yemei Noach. Kol yemei could take a singular or a plural. But not a vowel. Vayehi. Or that's not a motakriya. But when you have a vav at the beginning of the word or at the end of a word in a Sefer Torah, if that vav, if you have, what do you have?
It has a little star on top of that. What is that?
You have
Star in the Vayehi. Is that a reference?
Yeah, you have a little star there. It might be something in the back. Well, you have to look in the back on your last page, and it might say something.
Maybe you could keep that.
No, you have a little star, but I have no idea what it is. In theory, you have a little asterisk there. In theory, that asterisk should be to send you to a list in the back of your Tanakh somewhere with variant readings. That's what it probably really means. It might say that in the beginning somewhere, but I don't see it immediately. Anyway, it doesn't matter, a vav at the beginning of the word or at the end of the word. I want to spell it out again to you. A vav at the beginning of the word or at the end of a word. If it's supposed to be in the Sefer Torah and it's not there, it's called chaser, it's pasul. If it's not supposed to be there and you put it in, if it's Vayehi, and you put in Vayehu, Sefer Torah is pasul. Anyone who adds a letter or subtracts a letter from the Sefer Torah. And the halacha is beginning or end of a word. If you change the letter in the middle of a word, it'll take it away. It's also, except in the middle of a word, it makes an amot hakriya, aleph hey vav yud, al pi halacha, even though that's asur, but we don't pasul the Torah. We are not bikiyin today in what's called chaserot v'yeterot. There's a famous passage in Gemara and Kedushin that says we're not expert in chaserot v'yeterot. Chaserot v'yeterot means in the middle of a word. Aleph hey vav yud in the middle of a word. Aleph hey vav yud at the beginning of a word, even if it's a vowel, doesn't matter. But at the beginning of a word, if you add it or take it away, either way, if it's supposed to be there or it's not supposed to be there, your Sefer Torah is pasul. So I should understand the problem here. Now most of you have Vayehi. I can assure you, all Sifrei Torah in Brooklyn have Vayehi. All right? The Aleppo Codex has Vayehu. And the Rambam said that you have to write according to the Aleppo Codex. Right? And we follow the halacha should be Vayehu. And indeed, if you'll take a look at Mincha Shai and the various Mefarshim, they wrestled with this. They had a tremendous problem. They knew they had a serious problem here.
In chapter 5, yeah, from Adam to Noah, you can always say Vayehu, 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 Vayehu.
Okay, but I want to explain to you. grammar is not halakha l'Moshe Misina. The Ben Asher manuscript is. You see, in other words, we have a Kabbalah, how to write a Sefer Torah. They handed it down from generation to generation. You can't amend the biblical text on a rule of grammar. If I would follow your principle, you'd have to change all sorts of psukim. There are a lot of places in Tanakh where we have grammatical problems. You can't do it. You can't amend the text on the basis of grammar. We have a received text. We have the Balei HaMesorah spent endless years of their lives telling us here it's with a vav, here it's without a vav, regardless of the grammar. You understand? I just want to explain. I want to be sure you understand the immediate problem we have. The immediate problem we have is the manuscripts themselves here disagree. It's not a simple matter. Here there's really a disagreement among the best manuscripts, whether it should be Vayehi or whether it should be Vayu. There actually isn't a disagreement. So you have to count the majority of manuscripts, that's halakha, and it was done in various centuries and in various geographical areas. The count was made, and the last person to do the count was Keset HaSofer. I happen to bring a copy with me. This is what it looks like today if you would buy it in a bookshop, the Keset HaSofer. And the Keset HaSofer says, today when we write Sifrei Torah, we write Vayehi. That's it. He counted all the manuscripts wherever he lived, and the majority was Vayehi. We follow Vayehi. He didn't have the Aleppo Codex. But now we have the Aleppo Codex, and all the best Ben Asher manuscripts, we have the Leningrad manuscript and so on, and they read Vayehu. Now, if I'm not going to read that pasuk twice, and nobody's reading that pasuk twice, right? You haven't heard anybody read that pasuk twice in Parashat Noach. Don't trouble me with Bifnehem, Lifnehem, and reading all these other psukim twice. Because there, the whole crucial question in the Sefer Torah, whether you have a kosher Sefer Torah in front of you. If I really wanted to follow a Chumrah, or if I wanted to be Yotzei Kol HaShitot, there, and I'm only giving you one sample. There's more. But I'm giving you the kinds of samples where, if we really had to make a decision, that's where we have to make a decision whether we're going to read it once or twice. Now, they didn't have that problem. Reb Chaim Volozhin didn't have that problem. The Chatam Sofer didn't have that problem, because when they counted in their day, the count was made already, and they already had Vayehi. They already made the decision that you read Vayehi. Holchen Achaharov. But now that the Aleppo Codex is available, and not only that, nobody here has a Breuer Tanakh? You forgot to bring it, okay. Now, Breuer claims he follows the Aleppo Codex, and if he follows the Aleppo Codex, of course he was missing the Aleppo Codex today is missing the first, almost the whole Torah, most of the first 5 books of the Torah. But we have the testimony, not a problem. We have lots of testimony. All those people who went to Aleppo and recorded what they saw, they all have Te'echad. Everybody agrees. I have the evidence in front of me. It's Vayu. Yeah. So what Breuer is very diplomatic. I have to give him a lot of credit. And he brings both. He brings both. I think he prints, I'll be, the best of my knowledge, I don't have a Breuer, it's not with me, I think he prints Vayu, and in the margin he writes Sfarim Acherim Vayehi, which is fair. In other words, the Aleppo Codex, he's letting you know, I'm printing the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex says Vayu. Sfarim Acherim, others read Vayehi. But what I'm really getting at is, as we learn more and more about Mesorah, and now we know a lot, and we have more and more evidence, and now we have especially the Aleppo Codex, and via computer and photography and so on, we have all the manuscripts in the world now that you can look at and catalog them, compare one manuscript to another. It turns out that these debates that once took place in the 19th century, which was a debate between a mistaken printed Mikraot Gedolot and Kitvei Yad that was still preserved, so in some instances they said read a pasuk twice. In the light of that, make up your mind. Either you're going to have to read a lot of psukim twice, or don't read any psukim twice. But we have a serious problem on our hands. And this is part of the struggle that I spoke about last week that's going on now between Yerushalayim and Bnei Brak. In Bnei Brak, famous Rabbanim in Bnei Brak said, we have to rewrite all our Sfarim according to Ben Asher. And some Rabbanim in Bnei, a certain famous Rabbi Ratzabi, among others, Temani, said no reading twice. Not in Megillat Esther, nowhere else. No reading twice. We either have Psak Halacha how to write, or we don't have Psak Halacha. And if we have Psak Halacha how to write, that's what's kasher and Gamarnu. You don't read twice. No reading twice. On the other hand, in Yerushalayim, the Sofrim in Yerushalayim said, we're not going to follow the Ben Asher manuscript. We do what our fathers did, and what our grandfathers did, and what our grandmothers did, and they wrote this way, and we're going to write that way. We don't make any changes, and we don't care about what's happening in the rest of the world. Minhag avotenu biyadenu. It was good enough for the Chatam Sofer. It was good enough for the Chaim Volozhin. We just simply follow exactly whatever he did. Nothing changes. And there are Haramim flying around, and Yisurim, and bands, and so on. And Yehudim, Hayta Ora B'Simcha Sasom V'Yakar. Thank you very much. Okay.
Regarding pronunciation controversy, do you have any sources of research based on the differences between the Hasidic pronunciation? And the
I am not. You mean just pronunciation of Hebrew in general?
yes, the major
No.
difference in the
Um, Absolutely, and they both have problems. Take it very simple here. Sfaradim make no distinction between Segol and Seder. If the Balei Besorah used two different notes, right, two different signs, one is Seder and one is Segol, there was a difference in pronunciation. Sfaradim don't have it. Now Ashkenazim mispronounce half the letters of Hebrew. They make no distinctions between the letter Tav, Saf, and Samach, and with a digation, without a digation, all sorts of other letters, and they certainly don't pronounce the gutturals, ayin, and so on properly.
A lot of vowels, there are certain common things amongst Ashkenazim and Sephardim that Hasidim are totally different.
Absolutely. The answer is simple. Look, Sfaradim lived in Arabic countries. Their pronunciation of Hebrew is very much colored by Arabic pronunciation. Arabic makes no distinction between Segol and Sera. Sfaradim make no distinction. Ashkenazim lived in Germany. They spoke Yiddish. Those dialects and those sounds influenced how they pronounce a cholam, and so on and so forth. This is well known. The real interesting question is, in pristine form, if we can go back to the time of Tanakh, what did Hebrew sound like? And the answer is we have evidence. There are people alive today who can speak Hebrew pretty much, can tell you exactly what Hebrew sounded like in the time of Tanakh, in the time of Chazal, and books are being published now all the time. Let me explain to you in part how it could be done. So it requires great scholarship, but it can be done. Nothing can be done with 100% certainty, but you can move in the right direction. In many Sidurim, take a look if you want to see sometimes, in Ashkenazi Sidurim, the Kaddish is transliterated into English. You ever see that? You ever see Yiskadal, Yiskadash, and they'll say Y-I-S. Okay, all right. You don't have to know anything about Hebrew, but if you can read that if you know English, and you can read that transliteration, that tells you what somebody heard. In other words, whoever did the transliteration, he heard. He didn't hear Yit, he heard Yis. So it says Y-I-S. If he heard Yit, he would have written Y-I-T. Right? So we have transliterations. We have transliterations of Hebrew into Ladino, into Latin letters. We have transliterations of Hebrew into Arabic. We have transliterations of Hebrew into English letters, into Latin, and so on, from all different periods. We have transliterations of Hebrew into Greek. We have transliterations of Hebrew into Latin from the time of Jerome, going back to the 4th century, in other words, and Greek from the 1st centuries BC. Transliterations, the same thing. Yiskada, that's Bereshis Bara Elokim. We have a beautiful Greek transliteration of a good part of Tanakh. In Greek letters, they're writing the Hebrew, they're writing Breshit, Bara, they're writing it in Greek letters. Right.
Then you have to know how Greek
You have to, you're absolutely right. That's why didn't I say at the beginning, you have to be a great scholar to do this. Not everybody can do this. But based on this, you can reconstruct very, very well. And we don't have to, and we know how well we can do in many instances, because to take Yiddish, for example, Yiddish is a living language. People alive, there are many different dialects of Yiddish. Hungarian Jews speak one kind of Yiddish, Lithuanian Jews speak another kind of Yiddish. We know exactly what it sounds like. It's recorded now. We can record the Yiddish. There are live people who are speaking Yiddish. And we have books from the 17th and 18th century, transliterations of Yiddish into Polish that is written in Latin letters, Polish books. And sure enough, we can test and we can see exactly what Yiddish sounded like.
I wanted to take us back. It's still that's only one version of what was spoken.
That's right. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. But one can do as much as one can do, right? So what I'm really saying is there's much evidence and whole huge volumes being published right now in the last year, as a matter of fact. Quite a few volumes were published in Israel on the pronunciation of Hebrew in Talmudic times and so on. We have the Yemenite community. Everything's being recorded now, by the way, also. The last Yemenite Rabbanim who remembered how the Talmud was read, forget about Tanakh, they have a tradition how to read Shas. They memorize the vocalization and a tune. They have a ta'amim for Mishnah. How do you sing Mishnah properly? It's all recorded now. Now it's not even a problem anymore. Now it's recorded. It's on tape. It has to be analyzed and studied and so on to reflect a particular dialect of a particular period and so on. Scholars are doing this all the time. So they're not going to solve every problem in the world, but all I'm trying to say is there's a pretty good sense now of what Hebrew sounded like, both in the biblical period and in Talmudic times, and what they discovered so far is neither Ashkenazi nor Sephardi. No. And they can account. I want to be precise here. They can account exactly for all the sounds in Ashkenazi pronunciation of Hebrew. It's not that Ashkenazi made up sounds. It's the influence of the dialects and sounds where you live on how you pronounce letters. You live in America long enough, you pronounce a R a certain way as an American pronounces an R. When you're going to say Reish, you're going to pronounce Reish the way an American pronounces an R. That's all.
No one is closer to the real thing, as far as you know.
As far as modern scholarship, no one is closer to the real thing. No.
Oh, to the extent that, for instance, Temanim distinguish between
Oh yeah,
sounds
they.
and sounds
yeah.
with the Davish without
That's
the
right.
TH.
That's right. But here, each Eda, including Ashkenazim, believe it or not, each one preserved some sounds better than others. In other words, yes, it may turn out that Temanim